debt of love, not just to please ourselves, bearing His weaker heart with praise. We're in the kingdom now. We have a global view, expanding kingdom fields by sharing the good news. We're in the kingdom now. Oh, let the glory be in all that comes from you, in all you do for me. For the Messiah's come, oh, what wonders do. All creation praise His chosen one will to give a debt of love, not just to please ourselves, bearing His weaker one with grace. We're in the kingdom now. We have a global view, expanding kingdom fields by sharing the good news. Now change. We're in the kingdom now. Oh, let my glory be in all that comes from you, in all that you do through me. Great doctrine, that doctrine of glorying in the right things. Part of our wonderful inheritance. Okay, here we go. I keep waiting for that. Where is it? Where is it? Ready, here we go. Dare my faith to be a Daniel. Dare to make your master known. Dare to have a heart of purpose. Dare it bold to stand alone. Walking in this world untarnished, meeting all that God commands. Overcome by faith and wisdom, in the wrath and strength we stand. Dare my faith, dare my faith to be a Daniel. Dare to make your master known. Dare to have a heart of purpose. Dare to bold to stand. Verse 2. Stand for God in testimony. Babylon is not your home. Fearlessly among the lions, pray and worship Him. Dare my faith to be a Daniel. Dare to make your master known. Dare to have a heart of purpose. Dare to go. Verse 3. Dare to use your gifts and talents in a lost and darkened world. Dare to pray what God has promised. Experiential Jerusalem. Dare my faith to be a Daniel. Dare to make your master known. Dare to have a heart of purpose. Dare to call to stand. Verse 1. Walking in this world untarnished, God commands. Overcome by faith and wisdom, in the wrath and strength we stand. All right, that's it. Let's open those Bibles at Daniel chapter 3. You put that off. Yeah, pull that out. You'll electrocute yourself. The three amigos in the fire. That's what we're doing tonight. And the three amigos, the names are, don't give me them Babylonian names. Don't give me Shadrach,
Mishael.
Mizuno. Very good. Evelinsky knows them. All right. And I think a good theme for this particular chapter is, when you walk through the fire, you will not be scorched, nor will the flame burn you. God says, Jacob, I love you. You are mine. And when you walk through the fire, you'll not be scorched. All right. Our overall theme for Daniel, and especially these early chapters, is that the heavens do rule. The kingdom has been taken from the earth by the unfaithfulness of the Jews. Nevertheless, God is still in the heavens, and he's still ruling and reigning and doing amazing things. As a matter of fact, I think it would really help us to interpret the book of Daniel if we keep these three things in view. The first thing being that it's a time of devastation and tragedy. In the darkest moments of the history of God's people, the sovereign God comes to the fore and acts. It's an amazing thing, really. But you cannot stop God. Even when God's people are so unfaithful, God still works. And so the context of Daniel is absolute tragedy. The kingdom of Israel's fallen apart. Daniel's royalty is nothing. He's a slave now. They've been unceremoniously shipped down to Babylon, where they're all slaves. They walked 700 miles. A number of them died, I'm sure, on the trip. It's just a tragedy all the way around. Yet God will testify of himself, specifically by keeping Daniel and his friends alive and well and victorious through those first 6 chapters, the fire, the lion's den, the whole deal. Now, that's amazing. And what it shows is, even in the most difficult and dark times, if you happen to live in the very darkest center of the darkest heart of Africa, God's still on your side. And he's still going to see you through. Because he's faithful and he can't deny himself. And if you'll be faithful to him, you'll see him do extraordinary things, even miraculous things on your behalf. That's really what this says. Not just hidden things, but extraordinary things on our behalf. Chapter 2, we saw this dream of Nebuchadnezzar's, or as I call him, Nebuchadnezzar. And it really unsettled him, because he saw some kind of a huge image which represented in his mind, for sure, something very human, as a matter of fact, himself. You know, when you see a gold statue in front of you, you always assume it's yourself, pretty much, since we all love ourselves that much. And then to suddenly see it fall apart, crushed to the ground by a boulder that comes out of nowhere and grinds this whole thing to dust. It's quite a scary thing, and he woke up quite afraid. And God used this dream in 2 simple ways. Number one, it doesn't matter how big a potentate somebody is, God can just tweak you with his pinky finger, and you will be afraid. Nebuchadnezzar, by this point, is now the ruler of the largest empire that has been in the ancient world. It's larger than anything the Assyrians or the Egyptians or anybody come up to at this present time. Now, of course, that excludes the Han Dynasty and some other thing. We're just talking about sort of biblical prophetic history. And so God stepped into Nebuchadnezzar's proud-filled, self-glorious life and just went, tweak, to say, as it were, to Nebi the Cad, like he says to Dana the Cad, hey, my mother always used to say to me, I was born in Brooklyn, over the bridge. She said, you may have been bred in Brooklyn, but you're only a crumb here. My mother had a lot of wonderful, endearing sayings. And it was true. I was acting up, doing something wrong, and what she said was right. Now, you see, the fact of the matter is, God's got to tweak us once in a while, because you're so self-centered, so full of yourself, and especially if you do something right, which, like Paul Simon says, when I do something right, it's likely to confuse me. It's such an unusual sight, he says. I love that song. But anyway, you don't know it, so there we go. So this dream momentarily humbled Nebuchadnezzar, I would say for 12 and a half minutes. But it shows that God will speak to anybody
And he even spoke most amazingly, of course, to Cyrus, the king of Persia, in such a way that Cyrus' whole heart changed and dedicated his life to getting the temple built in Jerusalem. That's amazing. So number one, God used it to touch Nebuchadnezzar's life. But number two, this dream is a first draft of something regarding the kingdoms of this world and the kingdom of God. So the interpretation of this man with his various metallic things, which was covered so nicely last week, the interpretation is a prophetic definition of earthly kingdoms as to their quality, strength, corruption, and eventual end at the coming of God's kingdom to earth. Every kingdom on earth, every country in this globe, has a relative quality. Some are better than others. Some have more gold, some have more clay. And in one sense, you can almost judge all the kingdoms and the empires of this world as to whether they're gold, silver, bronze, or iron and clay. Just, you understand what I'm saying? So the Bible grants that there's some kingdoms that are better than others, and we have to understand that in order to understand Matthew 25, when Jesus comes to reward nations for offering a cup of cold water to the Jews and to Christians. He says, you offered a cup of cold water to my people, so you offered it to me. And he's speaking, as you read it, to the nations as they gather before him in his millennial kingdom. And he says, now you've been good as a nation, relatively speaking, and you'll be rewarded, and you persecuted my children. I tell you what, all I can say is, when the whole thing comes down and Jesus returns to this millennial kingdom, with the way things are presently at this state, Iran's in for it. Because they've been persecuting, Palestinians have been persecuting the Jews and just want them annihilated. Now God watches this whole thing, whole game being played out. And we will be rewarded or punished as nations during the millennium. Now, there's a lot of other wonderful things, but the guy's closing up shop outside, so let's get going. Now, Daniel 3, Nebi's vision is basically this. So here's what he decides to do. I'm going to build me a statue all of gold, and it's me. You see my particular kind of beard? You see the beard I got here? Yeah. So I'm going to build me a statue. Everybody can tell, yeah, that's Nebi the cat's beard. Yeah. As a matter of fact, that's him. He's got a little pot belly there. Yeah, he's got bulging biceps. And so he built himself, saying in defiance of God, in a sense, God, you made me just a head. I think I'm going to take over the whole shebang. Why shouldn't I be? Well, why shouldn't my kingdom be eternal? Well, I can fight off the gods and do this, and at least allow my progeny to sit on the thrones after me in some kind of eternal kingdom. So here we go. Look at me in all my glory and riches and power. And so in the middle of the desert in Jura, somewhere outside Babylon, he built this huge statue. All right. So let's start to read here. Here we go into Daniel. And let's do Daniel 3, and somebody read verses 1 through 3. Cole, maybe start with you. 3, 1 through 3.
Nebuchadnezzar, the king, made an image of gold, whose height was 60 cubits and its width 6 cubits. He set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. King Nebuchadnezzar sent word to gather the satraps, the administrators, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, judges, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image which King Nebuchadnezzar had set up.
Okay. So they had a dedication ceremony just like they had out here last Thursday of the World Trade Center, the memorial. You're right? Okay. They built an image 60 cubits. Everybody knows a cubit is from your elbow to the end of your hand, which in the ancient days was 18 inches. Now for local it's 39, but back in those days it was standard. See? So that was a cubit. How many cubits? You measure with your arm. 60. 90 feet high. 9 feet wide. But there's prophetic significance to the use of cubits rather than inches or feet or meters. And the prophetic significance of it is this. Everything is 6, 6, which has a prophetic significance to it. Being what? 6 is the number of man. That's right. So this is a statue of of man's best attempt at exalting himself. They've actually found this pedestal they've uncovered in the desert, some miles southeast of Babylon and what they're calling Dura for the present. They believe that could be the pedestal upon which the statue stands. Now, extant in Egypt right now is that statue right there of some pharaoh. I forget what his name was. There we are. Anybody know his name was? And it's 20 feet high. Very good. Okay. Now, the guy in the middle is who? One of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Hercules? Another one? I tell you what, I'll give you a hint. He was on the road. One of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. Colossus of Rhodes. This is Colossus, and he stood over the harbor of in the island kingdom of Rhodes, and you had to come in through this formidable structure. How tall was this? I mean, it's known in history. There's plenty of records on it. It's not something. It was built, I think, in the 3rd century BC. So this was after, in fact, the statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Anybody? Just by looking at it? Figure it out. Quick cubits. Cubit numbers. Right. And you came up with 98 feet. And you were right. That's how tall it was. So now, Nebi's statue was what? 90 feet tall. So you see, they made these things back in those days amazingly. Of course, probably out of brick covered with iron because gold didn't have the strength to build a solid guy up there. He'd melt by next Thursday. So just to give you a frame of reference, how tall is the Statue of Liberty? Tall. 111 feet.
Is that just the statue or the whole?
That is just the statue.
Wow.
And not the pedestal. So this statue of Nebuchadnezzar was a sizable and very expensive, showy, ostentatious image. I got money. Look at this. Now, there's a political reason behind this story, which is not mentioned in Daniel, because Daniel's more prophetic, but it turns out that in the Babylonian records, there was an attempted coup in the 10th year of Nebi's reign, which is 595 BC, after which the leaders of the empire may have been gathered for a loyalty oath unto the statue, to regather his group. And so all of these satraps and everything from all the empires, as you see, it says Daniel 3:4, all the peoples, nations, men of every language. So this wasn't just a local thing. These were basically the leaders of the Babylonian Empire, which was immense. It took in the Egyptian Empire. It took in the Assyrian Empire. It was huge. And so they all came in. The Egyptians came in. The guys from Palestine and the Philistines. I mean, it was a very big occasion. But there's an underlying principle behind this statue, which has been used down through the ancients of time and is still applicable today. Namely, the perpetuation of any kingdom necessitates an image which focuses and can stir deep loyalty, thus granting a certain mystical religious power to the state. So it's not surprising that those 2 guys over in the far right, which are, this is, what is it? North Korea, the dad and the son. And people are worshiping and crying and bowing down to the statues. Directly underneath him is Mao Zedong. And everybody's bowing and weeping and carrying on there too. Now, you see, there's a very subtle thing there, isn't it? Now you have a state. It's an entity. It's an empire. It's something there. It has its own identity, you might say. But how do we solidify the identity? We've got to find an image that will bring people together. And so they sort of insist on worship. Now, the one up in the upper left, is anybody know what that is? It is. It's the statue of Mary in? No. But you see, this is also true of Catholicism. This is the central, in the central, what is that called? Like it's, well, Romans would say a circus, but there's a loop road, no, in Manila. Of all the nations that I've ever been to, including Brazil and everything, I have to say, and Mexico, I'd have to say that the Filipinos are the most entrenched in Mariology. Many times they don't even mention Jesus. It's really all about Mary. And that whole nation is kind of wrapped around Mary. But it gives them an identity. And down through the I mean, so whose big statue was up during the communist reign? And in Iraq, whose statue did they pull down? You know, there's something about that. There's a spiritual something behind that, what I'm trying to say. It enables, I don't know, what would you say it does? I don't want to say it authenticates a nation's sort of religious basis, but it gives them, what is it? I guess you could say that. It kind of crystallizes. I'm trying to say it really affirms a sort of a religious state. I mean, it's like the Führer. I mean, you know, actually, I mean, the Germans would say to serve Germany is to serve the Führer, and to serve the Führer is to serve God. That's the way the German Lutherans put it, as they fell behind Adolf Hitler in the Second World War. So anyway, there's a principle back there, and we just need to keep that in mind, because suddenly, if we extrapolate Daniel and jump right into Revelations, chapter 13, bingo, what do you have immediately planted up there as soon as the beast comes out of the earth? An image that must be worshipped, or you can't get food. We'll look at that in a minute. All right. So now the Proclamation Ultimatum. That's a little different than the Emancipation Proclamation. Let's see, Jeff, how about reading that? Got your glasses on there? Daniel 3, 4 through 7.
Yep. Daniel 3, 4 through 7. The herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebi has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden statue that King Nebi had set up."
And that modern translation actually says King Nebi. So, all right. So they had these instruments. They mentioned 2 wind instruments. How did they ever come up with the name horn? Yeah.
The horn of a ram.
Exactly.
Lamb.
The horn of an animal is what they use. So, you know, one of those things. That's what horns originally were before they had mouth. You know, it's the Romans who invented mouthpieces, so they could play all that. And then Elizabeth Taylor comes in. I remember her well. Oh well, anyway. So 2 wind instruments, 2 stringed instruments. They're lyres or gazooties or whatever. Some translations say bagpipes, but they didn't have the Irish bagpipes back then. And 1 percussive instrument. And with local, all you need is 1, really. Right, there you go. The masses would bite the dust immediately in worship and say, "Oh, great poobah." And they'd listen to the song. This was a mandatory state affair. You had to go. It was or those who, especially those who were in positions of state. You know, they were all magistrates, leaders, governors, satraps, and all that. And the threat of fiery doom was issued for anybody breaking up. This is something Jeffrey notes as interest. It's interesting how important music is to the enticement of idolatry. You know, especially mantric music, especially mesmerizing music. There is a way of playing music that actually hypnotizes. And I don't know what the music sounded like here, but I doubt it was hip hop. So they got mesmerized, and they said, you sort of fall into this trance, and I don't know if they kept saying Nebi, Nebi, Nebi the cat. Who knows what they said? All right. Duty-bound Chaldeans. That's the problem in every business and in every government. There's those bean counters who tell on you. These happen to be the Chaldeans. Those are the wisest philosophers in Babylon. And don't you know they're snitches? See, if you didn't have snitches in your business, you'd get away with a lot. When the business says, bow down to the water cooler and, and wipe your boss's shoes, if you didn't have a Chaldean around, you'd get away with it. But there we go. All right, 8 through 15, you young, let's have a good reading of this. Oh, wait a minute. You got one of those King James versions?
Yeah.
Unknown by man or beast? No, read it anyway. Go ahead.
Oh gosh. Okay, we're correct to find certain Chaldean Jews.
Wait a minute. You young. Are you speaking to Sarah or are you speaking to everybody? You see Jimmy on the back row? I bet you Jimmy didn't hear a word you said.
Wherefore at the time
There we go.
came near and accused the Jews, they spake and said to the king Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. Thou, O king, hast made a decree that every man shall hear the sound of the cornet, flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery, and dulcimer. And
What's a sack bit? Isn't that what it is?
What is a sackbut? Sorry. And all kinds of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And who shall fall it not down and worship it, that he should be cast into the midst of a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom thou
But there are some Jews.
but there are certain Jews whom thou hast set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee. They serve not thy gods, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in his rage and fury, commanded to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Can you say that last?
Abednego.
Abednego. Thank you.
Like,
and they brought these men
to bed I
before
go.
the king.
Same thing.
Nebuchadnezzar spake and said unto them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego? Do not ye serve my gods, nor worship the golden image which I have set up. Now if ye be ready, that at what time ye hear the sound of the cornet. Sorry. Flute, harp, sackbut, psaltery. Dulcimer, sorry guys, and all kinds of music, you fall down and worship the image which I made. Well, but if ye worship not, ye shall be cast the same hour in the burning fiery furnace. And who is that God that shall deliver you out of my hands?
All right, there you go. Well, it's just a very spirited reading, and so now the Chaldeans, you got to remember, there probably was some jealousy underneath because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego had been posted to pretty grand positions in the empire, and they were under them actually, whether that was a matter of authority or not. But these kinds of things stay in people's minds, and they look for a time to get even. But a principle behind this all is this: nonconformity to the world standards readily arouse suspicion and persecution to those of free conscience. If you have a free conscience, you're headed for trouble, because there are those who want to demand conformity, and they go to great extents to make sure that we're all on the same page. The king, king of this particular empire, was supposedly a very tolerant king and kingdom. The Assyrians, when they captured a place, they killed as many people as they ever hauled away into captivity. The Babylonians were much bigger about it. They just made you a slave, which they thought was a merciful reaction. So, but when these guys refused to do what Nebuchadnezzar wanted, the king's rage revealed that spirit behind the policy of feigned tolerance. I'll never forget when I made the great mistake while I was still in college of majoring in philosophy and being in philosophy classes when I got saved. Boy, was I headed for trouble. I mean, I innocently started asking questions about, the meaning of this and that and everything. And these tolerant philosophers, of whom I was one, smoking a pipe with a tweed jacket and the whole thing, they got really upset. There was this veneer of tolerance in the liberal arts universities that think of themselves as being highly tolerant and everything. But as soon as some poor believer comes in there with basic Bible faith, they either laugh at you, yell at you, or just simply tear you apart. There's something about it, see, when you're not going the party line. Well, there you go. So they get exposed. To compromise or not to compromise? Said King Lear. No, who was it? That is the question. All right, 16 through 18, Jack.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your God, or worship the golden image that you have set up.
Okay. Now Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah would not break the second commandment, which is, all right, thou shalt not make any graven image or serve any image. Jews are dead set against that. These guys immediately didn't compromise because they knew what the scripture said. This is where this particular chapter, I think, has importance to us, as we'll see down the road. You see, here's the point. New Testament scriptures like Romans 13, which Ray gave a wonderful exposition on a few weeks ago, as well as 1 Peter 2, 13 through 17, they command submission and the paying of taxes to state authorities as they promote peaceful rule and protection of life and freedom. So you want to support the government because government brings in order and rule and safety. And for the Roman government, they brought in roads and access and a lot of things, right? However, when authority of state, that is, when the state takes authority through legislation, which is invasive of conscience and faith, it has overstepped its God-given authority. So there are those Christians who say, well, we should obey our government and everything. The Bible doesn't say that at all. It says we should pray and support our governments because of their beneficial things that they do. But when they step upon your private conscience, then you must obey God rather than man. Who said that? Peter. I'm sorry, on this, I'm going to have to obey God rather than man. Jesus obeyed his nation's laws, paying even the temple tax, etc., but took no part in the affairs of the corrupt Jewish state. He had nothing to do with Herod, nothing to do with all the pomp and ceremony of the corruption of Israel in its rule, even the Sanhedrin and all of its businesses. He had nothing to do with it whatsoever. He walked right around it. So we just look at that testimony of the amigos. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire. Now that's an amazing statement. And furthermore, they say this, even if that doesn't happen, he will deliver us out of your hand. Okay. So here we see that the men of God used the shield of faith. And they stood and said, God will deliver us. There's no question about it. God will deliver us. You can't hold us, Nebuchadnezzar. God will deliver us from you. And he may deliver us from the burning fire. But even if he does not, now there's the second phase. So now if we have a full faith, we have the shield of faith that believes God is standing with us. And yet at the same time, we have the humility of submission. And the humility of submission, this thing says total submission, this little blurb here. There's only one way to please the King of Kings, and that's to bow before him. God never takes orders, he only gives them. So even in a place like this, he does not say, God will deliver me, I believe God will deliver me from this fire because I've commanded him to, because I'm a faithful warrior. No, he's still humble and says, well, if he doesn't, that's God's business. And I'm just putting my life into his hands. So there's got to be that humility along with our faith, you see. And then the third part, let it be known to you, O king, that we're not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you've set up. So whatever the conclusion is, we're not going to go there. We're not worshiping that God. And Martin Luther was so famous for his stand by faith in front of the whole Holy Roman Empire and the Catholic Church when he said, here I stand, I can do no other, God help me. Amen. So there is a picture of uncompromising faith among those three brothers. First, they believed that God was with them. Second, they believed even if God weren't with them, they were still going to stay loyal and they were not going to do that which was being commanded. Now that's a tremendous testimony. And this is the main lesson that we should learn from this passage. Anybody know here? Let's get some people on the back row there. Back row guys. Julio, Grace, back row there beyond my vision. I can't quite see. Who said, if I perish, I perish? Esther. Thank you, Grace. Right? So Esther said, I'm going in to talk to the king, even though he hasn't asked me to come. And if I perish, I perish. I just say this now, just store this in your piggy bank, or your mind, your whatever. Your data bank, that's what I was looking for. Because perhaps in your lifetime, you're going to have to stand before somebody who's going to threaten to take your life if you don't toe the line. And you just remember, God comes closest to you when you're going through a trial. Stand with him. The testimony of the martyrs, such as people like this, is I never felt God closer than when I stood alone before my enemy. Let's read 19 through 25. Let's see here. Danielle, you've got a good voice there. Let's see that they were thrown into the fiery furnace, of course, and we know the story, but it's so wonderful to recite. Yeah, 3:19 through 25.
Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into a blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent, and the furnace so hot, that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't these the 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the 4th looks like a son of the gods.
All right. Well, the message speaks for itself. The destructive fire of religious rage consumed even the executioners, but there in the midst of the fire, they were standing by a God who's a very present help in time of need. God's very presence is known in the fire. And when you go through your life and your ups and downs, your trials as well as your blessings, you will look back and you'll say, God was closest to me when I was in the middle of a fire. God will never leave you nor forsake you. And these guys, even there was this 4th image, as it were, as I'm saying, a pre-incarnate epiphany of Jehovah. The Lord Jesus, the Son of God, before he became Jesus as a flesh-born human. There was God, Jehovah, standing with these guys in an amazing way. Okay. The point being, of course, that Jehovah sovereignly overrules the King of Kings. All right, 26 through 30. Carrie, would you read?
And Nebuchadnezzar went near the mouth of the burning fiery furnace and spoke, saying, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here. Then Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came from the midst of the fire. And the satraps, administrators, governors, and the king's counselors gathered together, and they saw these men, on whose bodies the fire had no power. The hair of their head was not singed, nor were their garments affected, and the smell of fire was not on them.
All right. The fire had left no mark on them at all, not even smell. No hair was singed. You know, Jesus. There's some references and allusions when Jesus says, you know, God knows all the hairs on your head. So I think this has some allusion to these guys. Nebuchadnezzar reverses his irreversible proclamation before the Most High God, whom he calls the Most High God, El Elyon, as a very God the highest. And the king makes a new proclamation honoring the men of their God. Oh, look, we've got to read 29 and 30. Sorry. I didn't get through there. Go ahead, Carrie.
Nebuchadnezzar spoke, saying, Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve nor worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, or language which speaks anything amiss against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
Well, praise God. There we are. They won. Awesome, dude. And so it says, as we take bits from Hebrews 11:34 through 37, I believe, by faith they quenched the power of fire. It's referring to these three. Escaped the edge of the sword, talking about all these faithful people that he has no more time to mention in the 11th chapter. Others were tortured with mockings and scourgings, chains and imprisonment, stoned, sawn in two, put to death with the sword, men of whom the world was not worthy. The Lord delivered some men in the fire, delivered some men through the lion's den, and some men died. Who was sawn in two? Isaiah. So tradition tells us. And many were mocked and imprisoned and stoned, and etc., put to death by the sword. But they remained faithful. So this is a story here that has a moral to it, and that's remaining faithful to God, no matter what happens and no matter what we go through. Martin Luther stood his ground, and after he put up the 95 Theses and the church tried to get him to recant and everything, he went before the princes and Charles V, king of the Holy Roman Empire, the big dude of Europe. Just before his excommunication, he said, "My cause shall be commended to the Lord, for he lives and reigns, and preserved the 3 Hebrew children in the furnace of the Babylonian king. If he is unwilling to preserve me, my life is a small thing compared with Christ. Expect anything of me except flight or recantation. I will not flee, much less recant. So may the Lord Jesus strengthen me." You know, we look at these guys back in history, and they put their life on the line for the truth of the gospel. That which we go, yeah. These guys are willing to die for it. I can't imagine standing before the Holy Roman Empire, but these guys were so full of pomposity and pride, everything evil. But it goes back to these principles of the statue and the trumpet, and you must bow. In Europe, if you didn't bow to the Pope and to the Holy Roman Emperor, you were summarily had your head chopped off. And Martin Luther stood in such a place where that could happen. Another example we have is John Chrysostom. He was a great preacher. Chrysostom means golden mountain. And he was a great preacher who stirred up the eastern side of the Catholic Church back in those days, until Emperor Arcadius warned Chrysostom, if you don't give up Christ, he was anti-Christian. In about 370 AD, which is quite a while after Constantine said it's legal. Anyway, Chrysostom, he said, if you don't give up Christ, you'll be banished from the country. Chrysostom said, you cannot. The whole world is my Father's land. Then I'll take away all your property. You cannot. My treasure is in heaven. Then I'll exile you where you have no friend to speak to. You cannot. I have a friend who's closer than a brother. Then I'll take away your life. You cannot. My life is hid with Christ and God. And this guy threw up his hands, the emperor, and said, well, what can you do with a man like that? And let him go back where he preached until his death. Now, there's a faith that knows where his destiny is. And it wasn't like he memorized a bunch of verses. He stood before the magistrates, and as they asked these questions, he peeled out the word of God because he knew his life was hid with Christ and God. He knew where his treasure was. He knew where his land was. See, we get confused on this stuff, and we forget that this is not our home, and so on and so forth. Well, now these men stood faithfully. All right, so we got some questions for discussion, and I want us to break up in about 4 or 5 groups. A group back there, a group over by the couch, and let's look for about 10 minutes or so. Here's the question. Daniel 3 seems to prefigure the eventual demands for state loyalty and image worship found in Babylon at the very end. That is Revelation 13, 11 through 18, if you want to read it when you get together. Yet even today, a disciple of Jesus will be confronted with conflicting demands of the secular religions, both state and corporate. You know, your corporation may have a religion going. You soon find out. Or the state, the country we live in. We're blessed to be in the United States, but there's strange laws being written now in these days. So I just want you to discuss some common ways at work or in our country we might be tempted to compromise. I mentioned a couple of ways I just thought up as I was writing this down, but you may have some other ways like this. We might compromise by being told to be reasonable about our convictions in light of the tremendous importance of our job and position. Now realize this now, you got this important job, and you know, your sort of fanatic thing, you need to trim it a little bit there, Mo. Or tempted to compromise by the fear that any open stand might be construed as disloyalty to the company, which would likely impact the future. Or by just tipping the hat, giving a simple nod or deceptive reply to any compromising policy in a way that appears to be team loyalty and hides any real inward scruples. Or by realizing an idol is nothing. Therefore, bowing in feigned outward allegiance is trivial when compared to the personal benefits of doing so. There is no demons. There's no idol. The idol is nothing. They tell me to bow because it makes no difference. Anyway, just some ways, and you may think of some others. So let's gather and let's talk about these ways that this pressure that's put on us from the secular thing. Now, let's forget about the religious side of things. The secular religions of our state and of our employ. Okay? Some people over there. Some people right up here with Cole and Loca. Jack, why don't you go back there toward the middle? Yeah, so on and so forth. Jeff, maybe you better go back and help a group back there. The shorter guys back there.